Welcome to Brother Owl's Garden. I'm Brian, and I honor your presence here today. In an earlier episode called the Transcendent Trilogy, the third point that I illustrated was to attain to singularity, to merge and dissolve into God. And I wanted to elaborate more on that point and clarify a few things, because this is also an ongoing, unfolding process of realization for me as well as anyone that's on the path. In fact, that's why I love so much my lotus mala. And it's also why I named my cat Lotus, because the lotus is ever unfolding wisdom. Especially I love the white lotus because it symbolizes purity. So, we are always on this path of perpetual unfolding and revelation, or apocalypse as the word means. So I had some deeper meditations on that third point of, what I referred to before as dissolving into God or merging into God, or I probably said unity in divinity. And as I was meditating on that point, some good things came to me that I hope very much I can remember while I'm recording this. It can be scary. It can be scary to think, for example, when you're suffering and you're hurting and you've just had so much, too much of the world, those moments where, and I think I'm not alone in this, where you say, you know what, I if I could push a button right now, I'd leave it. I would go back home. I really would. And, you're not trying to say anything macabre or dire there as much as you're just saying, I wish I could just hit the restart button or the return button, and be done with all of this and be back in my happy place in heaven, however you want to envision that. It can be scary, the concept of dissolving into God, because, well, then what happens to me? If I dissolve into God, I don't exist anymore. Where am I? It's not as irrational as the people who are afraid that when you die, that's it, it's over and you don't exist anymore, except that they fail to realize that if you don't exist anymore, you're not experiencing non-existence, because non-existence cannot be experienced. But anyway, I digress. It can be scary to imagine pulling the plug on yourself, so to speak, and dissolving into God, because, that sounds wonderful, but then what happens to me? If you can convince me of the beautiful poetry and the wonder and charm and appeal of running off a cliff in Norway, thousands of feet high, and just losing myself in the cool breezes and the mist, wait a minute, I'm plummeting downwards towards the rocks. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. That is the ego intellect. The ego intellect, or as the Sufis call it, the nafs, N-A-F-S, the nafs or nafs. It's the self with the small s. The small s self. If it's easier, we'll just call it the ego. But what I mean when I say that is, I'm referring to who it is your ego thinks you are, or who you have been fooled into believing is you, which is your ego projection. That's a clearer way to say it. If you deeply and habitually, perpetually self-identify with your ego projection, my body is me, this is mine, I am this, I am, state your name, state your role in life, your occupation, state your feelings, preferences, dislikes, likes, habits, fetishes, preferences, whatever. If you think that is who you are, and on the very lowest level, you could argue that is who you are, but that's not ultimately who you are. But if you identify that as you, it not only seems alien, the concept of dissolving into God. But it also seems bizarre and scary. And if you are identifying with those low-level concepts of self, the small s, then it's confusing and scary. But when you realize that you are not those things, you are not who your ego projects out that you have thought you were, you're not that. Well, we can also apply that to, again, God, divinity. I can say with certainty that divinity, spirit, capital S, God, is not our concepts of God. That is assured that we are wrong. And that's why I just use the word God freely, because I sort of dismiss all of our conceptual ideas. In other words, who we think God is, or divinity is, or spirit is, whatever word is the least, of an issue for you. That concept of what we think that is most certainly incorrect, or at least incomplete or off in some way. So here's what's happening. The devotee, the aspirant, the meditator, the seeker comes to a point where they realize there's nothing higher and nothing more and nothing after merging into God, merging into divinity, attaining to singularity. And I don't know how to do it. Well, there's a blockage when the ego and the intellect are interfering. The ego says, "Whoa, don't do that. You're not going to exist anymore. What's going to happen to you? What's going to come of you if you do that? There's not going to be any more you. How could there be no more you? You don't want to go there. This is a bunch of fluff. You don't want to bother with this stuff." And the intellect says, well, if I did attain unity in divinity, in other words, myself and God as one together, well, that implies that there's still two. There's still God and there's still me, but we're somehow bonded. And, I could be wrong. Maybe that's as close as it gets. Maybe that is the pinnacle. I don't claim to have all these answers. But what I do know is that so many of, especially the Indian mystics, well, once you get into the level of a true mystic, the path that they got there from, whether it be Catholicism, Hinduism, Jainism, or Quaker, it doesn't, Sufi, it doesn't matter at that point. Once all of those paths on different sides of this mountain peak of mystical wisdom converge, well, here we are. How'd you get here? That path. Oh, and you? This path. At that pinnacle, that peak, it doesn't matter anymore. So all of them can lead there. And also, you can get there without any of them. But I highly advise taking the wisdom from all of them to assist in your own personal journey. That's my advice. But the intellect, kind of meddles and gets confused and jumbles things up. And then in this meditation that I was doing about this, I came to the realization, I think I understand why it's confusing and scary. Because there's still some levels of veils in front of my perception. They are peeling slowly. I can't force them or tear them off. They have to fade and drop as my realization expands and, as wisdom unfolds. The notion of who I think I am, which is inaccurate, let's call it false, and the notion of who I think God is, which is inaccurate, incomplete, let's call it false, is what I've been working with in trying to make sense of this concept of merging with God. I've got who I think I am wrong already. And I've got who I think God is wrong also. So this misconception and this misconception, now let's try to figure this out. Of course we're going to be confused. When you come closer and closer and closer to understanding who you are. You come closer and closer and closer to understanding what divinity is, who God is. And I believe at this point that these two, at a certain point of enlightenment, come face to face and realize that they are the one same thing. I am. That suchness. The Jewish and Christian traditions, I am who I am. The I am, the is, as I like to call it. The Hindu tradition, you are that suchness. That's what you are. In fact, I can't even say that and you, if you want to be clear, because that is not separate from you and you are not separate from that. I just want you to, again, that's how English doesn't work too well with spirituality. But I am that suchness, I am. And so, when I speak of merging into divinity, losing yourself in God, becoming unified in God, I'm not talking about the end of you for the sake of dissolving like a drop of water into the ocean dissolves into something much better than you. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that this attaining to singularity, this merging into divinity, this unifying in God, is not the end of you. It is the end of the illusions of who you thought you were. It is the taking off of the mask of the ego intellect. It is the release of the nafs. You are shedding the illusory concept of who you had forgotten and come to believe you were, and who you have never been. When we wake up from this dream, we are not that character that we identified with in the dream, at least not to the extent that we identify now. So, merging into divinity, unifying in God, is not that you cease being for the sake of dissolving into something far greater. It is you are setting down the illusion, the false conception, misconception of who you had thought you were. And when that is removed, when that is set down, lo and behold, you realize that all along you have always been that suchness that you have sought and yearned and ached for and been so disconnected from. And Lotus just walked quite a distance to come over here, so she's gonna say hello to everyone. Say hello, Lotus. Meow. I was talking about why I named you Lotus. Meow, meow. So, I think I've made the point that when I say attain to singularity, no more division of self from God. There is no more I'm this and God's that, and both of these are misconceptions in your own being, by the way. And when this illusion poof fades and turns to vapor, and this one fades and turns to vapor, you realize that all along you have always been that suchness. You are divinity. You are an expression of it right now. But the expression of it is not as much as you actually are. You are I am. abide in thankfulness for your highest good in the most benevolent outcome of the divine will.